I'll hand it off to Will Marshall.
So, I'll start out with like a quick question for an audience member, anyone, a volunteer.
Can you dance like Michael Jackson?
Later. Anyone? No? No one wants to. Do you remember what you were doing on June 25th, 2009?
Definitely died.
Yeah.
Then, actually, I think I was at a student, actually.
Do you remember?
I was driving home from a family dinner. Put it on the radio.
Alright, Ditto. Let's hear it. Nice. Well, on Thursday, June 25th, 2009, on the day before his 51st birthday, Michael Jackson was shockingly found dead at his home in Holmby Hills, California. Almost immediately following his death, overall internet traffic increased by about 11%, which was the most since 9/11. And websites like Google and Wikipedia crashed due to the amount of traffic that they got. Despite not releasing a hit song in over a decade, he became the best-selling artist of that year. People mourned his death all over the world, and 35 million people tuned in to watch his funeral, which is more than watched the Oscars or the NCAA football championship last year. It was one of the most significant events of the entire year. But why? Who was this guy? What made him so special? Why did Greg remember that he was driving home from a family dinner on this random day 7 years ago? Well, obviously everybody knows who MJ is. If you don't, then I don't know what to say to you. I could tell you that he's the third best-selling artist of all time, but the Thriller is the best-selling album and music video of all time. I could tell you that he's won more awards than any other artist in history, or that according to Google, he's more famous than any other person to ever live other than Jesus. Or I could just show you this video of him telling his pet monkey Bubbles to sit in sign language, which is kind of cool. But to me, this isn't why MJ is remembered so well. I think it was the other parts of his life that made him such an intriguing figure. It was like how the reality of his childhood and how mysterious his personal life and how sudden his death was that made him such a magnet for public attention. I'm not gonna stand up here and tell you about some crazy new invention that I made, because that's a lot of TED Talks are this crazy discovery. I'm just a kid who likes music a lot and Michael Jackson especially. I like to think of this as less of a TED Talk and more of a story that doesn't really get told about probably one of the most misunderstood people of all time, and what you probably don't know about the King of Pop. Ever since he was 5 years old, he was thrown right into the music industry. His father, Joe, shown right here, marketed him and his four older brothers as the Jackson 5, and America fell in love with them. They spent their days and nights in the studio, and they made hit after hit, with little adorable young Michael as the lead singer. How cute he is up there. But unfortunately, behind the scenes, this perfect family was actually pretty far from it. He said about his childhood, "I would do my schooling, which was 3 hours with a tutor, and right after that I would go to the recording studio and record. I'd record for hours and hours until it was time to go to sleep." Here I have an excerpt of a video, or of an interview that he did in the early 2000s. And you can just kind of see in how he reacts to the question, how much his past still haunts him so many years later.
I wanted to play sometimes, and I couldn't. I had to go.
When you would be practicing, you were very heavily disciplined by your father. What was that like?
Well, I didn't have it that hard, because he used me as the example. It was like, do it like Michael. And he practiced us with a belt in his hand. And if you miss a step, expect to be
as you can see, he had a price to pay for the success he had, which was his childhood, and that would come back to haunt him later. But there's no doubt that the success he had was due to the hours and hours he was forced to put in and practice when he was a boy. But I think even the word success would be an understatement for Michael Jackson. He revolutionized the music industry. He basically invented the music video with Thriller, and he set a precedent for mainstream black artists everywhere to be successful. He was the 1980s. But as I go through these years, you'll notice that his skin color gets significantly lighter, which brings us to the next mystery of his life, which was, why did he change from black to white? My quick answer would be that he had no choice. Yes, he was a little bit weird. He got the nose, that was him. He wanted to do that because he was a little bit self-conscious about his appearance. But what most people don't know is that he suffered from a rare skin disease called vitiligo. Vitiligo affects about 200,000 people every year, and it's uncurable. And it causes severe loss of pigment on significant parts of your skin. Here's a woman with vitiligo. Much like this woman, MJ had a pretty severe case, but because he had the money, he tried to hide the fact that he had the disease by just making his whole body lighter, and this was the result. Especially after the release of his 1991 song, Black or White, a lot of people thought that it was completely his idea to go with his whole message of it doesn't matter if you're black or white. But that's not true. And he received a lot of criticism because a lot of people thought he changed on purpose because he didn't like being black, but it wasn't he was young. He cared about how he looked, and he was self-conscious, and he didn't want to look he was in the public spotlight every day, and he didn't want to look like that. And a lot of people got mad at him for that because he had an opportunity to raise awareness about a disease like that, but he didn't. But the most infamous part of his life is the child abuse scandal in 2005, where he was accused by 2 young boys of child molestation, conspiracy to commit child abduction, conspiracy to commit false imprisonment, and providing alcohol to a minor. This was the culmination of a lot of criticism about his life, which started with the documentary that aired in 2003 called Living with Michael Jackson. Now, any reasonable person, if you watch it, you can be pretty skeptical of him in this. Because first of all, he calls his property Neverland, and he has amusement rides and stuff in the back. And it seems weird if you don't know anything about him. He always has all these kids running around, and he acts like a child himself. But yeah, the overall tone of the piece is that he's a child predator and stuff, but he's not. And this is where a lot of you may disagree with me and be oh, Michael Jackson. I'm gonna tell you why I think he's not. He said, "My childhood was completely taken away from me. There was no Christmas. There were no birthdays. It was not a normal childhood, nor the normal pleasures of childhood. Those were exchanged for hard work, struggle, and pain, and eventually material and professional success. But as an awful price, I cannot recreate that part of my life." Despite saying this, I would say that he still tried. He was recall that he didn't have a normal childhood. When he was as young as 8 years old, he was in the studio every night, and he was performing in strip clubs, in nightclubs, places where no 8-year-old should ever be. And then imagine that along with the discipline from his father and the beatings, and you could have some serious psychological consequences there. A lot of people don't consider it, but maybe he just had so many children around because he wanted to be a kid, because that part of his life was completely taken away from him. And he said multiple times that he gets no sexual pleasure whatsoever out of children, but that they're actually his inspiration for a lot of his music. But America, I guess, wasn't ready. They didn't really embrace that fact about him, so they judged him. His main problem was that he didn't really care what the public thought about him. He kind of just he didn't see how it could be weird, how people would interpret it wrong, that he had so many children around his house. He honestly he didn't feel like he needed to explain himself when someone would ask him, like, why do you have so many little kids in your house? Because he knew to himself that he was not doing anything wrong. But if you don't believe me, he was acquitted of all 14 charges against him. But either way, despite the outcome of the case, the documentary and the publicity surrounding the case had a devastating effect on his reputation. And he was basically sent into exile for the rest of his life. Then we go back to June 24th, 2009. He was rehearsing for his upcoming tour, his big return to the music industry. The next morning, he was dead. The official diagnosis was acute propofol and benzodiazepine intoxication, which were like sleeping medicines. Like, he wasn't completely healthy, but he was about to go on a world tour, and he was like singing and dancing the night before, so he was not near death in any way. It's still a mystery what happened to this day, but what is known is that his doctor was sentenced to 2 years in jail for involuntary manslaughter. So they still haven't really found out everything about it. But so what? Like, he lives, he made music, he died. A kid in my school is giving a TED talk about him, whatever. I like to think of this as a sort of like tribute to Michael Jackson. Here's a guy who spent his whole life making music and just trying to entertain us. He always had like the best intentions, and he never he always just wanted to spread love in the world. It sounds corny, but that's really what he wanted to do. And how do we treat him? Well, we called him a freak, we called him a pedophile, we called him a weirdo, we criticize how he looks. And I think it's just like a classic example of the public turning a hero into a villain. I guess what I'm really saying is, like, we should appreciate people like Michael Jackson. Because, like, although his personal life might overshadow his art sometimes, I think he deserves more credit. He should be put in there, in my mind, in history with people like the Beatles, Elvis, Michelangelo, Shakespeare, Da Vinci. His impact on our culture is unmeasurable. But I think there's also a lesson to be learned here. We shouldn't be so quick to judge when we hear one news story about a celebrity. Like these days, it seems like before we even find out if it's true or not, we think like, oh, I can't believe they did that. I used to like them too. Now they're going to be known for that. I can't like them anymore. But I think we need to be a little bit less gullible and a little less quick to judge when we don't really know what's going on in these people's lives. Like, everybody makes mistakes, even celebrities, believe it or not, and like the sooner we realize that, the sooner we can stop letting one negative news story, which might not even be true, tear down their accomplishments. Prince died yesterday, and over the next month, you'll probably hear about 1 million Prince songs on the radio, and Purple Rain will be on TV like 1,000 times. But I bet if you go back a week and you ask someone how they feel about Prince, then they would tell you, like, a lot of people, I'm sure, would be like, oh, he was weird, or he was too feminine, or he something like that. But if you ask them after he died, all they'll say is just like, oh, he was so great, he was incredible. But the same thing is true about Michael Jackson. People felt that way about him. And I think that we need to stop doing that. I guess there's only one quote that demonstrates how I feel.